All right, so let's look at some graphic settings for Warzone 2.
First things first, display mode. Very simple, very quick and easy. If you exclusively game on your PC, meaning like you're there to game, you're not a streamer, you don't have multiple monitors, you're just there to game, always put it on full screen exclusive. If you do have multiple monitors and you're tabbing out for whatever reason, or you stream single PC and you need to get out of your main monitor, don't tab out. It'll crash the game more often than not. Put yourself on full screen borderless. There's also a quick option here. Let me show you guys. If you go right click on your desktop, display settings, if you go all the way down to graphics, change default. So see optimizations for windowed games. Basically like when you put yourself in full screen borderless, it just reduces the latency like close to being in full screen mode. So also, by the way, quick trick, don't enable hags for your NVIDIA users. Don't enable hags
Hacks are
for
always bad,
Warzone.
both both in mythical terms and on computers. So
There you go.
say no to
That's it.
hags.
Obviously, just choose your main gaming monitor, display adapter. Don't touch that. Screen refresh rates. You could leave it on auto or, manually choose the highest refresh rate available on your system. If you know, for example, that you have I don't know, 240 hertz monitor, but you only see like 165 or 144, you want to go in Windows and check your display settings, or maybe you're not using the right cable. We always recommend using DisplayPort. You'll always get the best performance out of your monitor and your system. It also enables higher refresh rates than just HDMI.
And yeah, if you've got a new monitor that you just installed or you just started using, very likely that Windows will not have been set to the highest refresh rate for that monitor. So it's always
Exactly,
good to check it.
absolutely.
I've
And
never done that before. Uh,
dynamic resolution, we do not touch that. The reason for that is because it actually causes more harm than good. If you want to try to squeeze more FPS, we have some tricks on the quality panel, but just this is not the way to go. So we always recommend just off. Aspect ratio, leave it on automatic. The game will determine the best aspect ratio to your monitor, unless you want to set it to specific for some reason. If you have like a white screen, you want to play on normal resolution, go ahead,
mhm.
change it, but 90% of the time you want to leave it on automatic. VSync, VSync menus, gameplay, VSync, FreeSync, G-Syncs, all the syncs, unless you experience like really bad screen tearing, which is basically here represented as like the image, literally tears into. Don't turn it on, even if your FPS count surpasses like your monitor hertz. It's never a bad thing. Higher frames means lower latency. So there's no reason for them to be synced. Just leave that option off. So you want to make sure like in your monitor settings to make sure that your G-Sync or FreeSync is actually turned off. Custom frame rate limit, the big debate, the big debate. It's a myth. Just don't there's no reason for you to cap your frames. Like I said earlier, higher frames means lower latency. Also, what happens with frame limiters is that it just like it creates just a wall for your hardware, and sometimes some hardware doesn't react good, and just leave it uncapped unless you're really the type of person to stay chilling in the menus and the game open for like hours on end. Then
And
even
don't be
at
that
that,
person.
yeah, don't be that
Don't be
person.
that person.
Seriously,
When you're done, turn your game off. Turn your
turn
computer
your
off.
game off.
All right.
That's it. Yes, turn your
Come on, guys.
computer off. Yes, that's it. Not the Windows Update excuse. It takes 2 minutes to do Windows updates. Shaders optimization. There's no need to, go over this. To click them or whatever. The game doesn't manages them automatically. Display gamma, it has to do with this is usually if you're playing off a TV. The other one, this is like just standard to like computer monitors. So just leave it at 2.2. You'll get the best picture quality out of it. Brightness, that's a you issue. No, I'm just kidding. I always put it to where like you see a bit more than, just here, not put it really at the gray spot, like barely visible, like just a bit more. It clears out, like you could see a bit more, like, shadowy areas, all that,
Mhm.
like, nothing,
Yeah, you kind of
nothing
get somewhere in that
solid.
where like you can see
Yeah,
in slightly darker areas, which actually this game they've done a lot better job with like not having a
yeah,
ton of really
yeah,
dark
yeah,
stuff. Um,
absolutely.
but yeah,
Low rose.
that's kind of what I
Yeah.
do too. Is yeah, just try and make it to where you can see a little bit darker areas, but you don't want everything to be all washed out.
HDR, if you like playing with it on, turn it on. If not, it's set by default on auto. I would just make sure that it's off to not, like cause issues or whatever. You never know.
Yep,
Just that.
and that's a setting that like your monitor may or may not support HDR. So
Exactly. If it doesn't support it, actually, if it doesn't support it, it will not show up in game. The only thing is that I don't know. I just have a thing where like, it's set on automatic. It doesn't really change anything. Just don't know if one day the game will decide to turn it on and it'll override the setting. That's why I'm just like, just turn it off
yep.
if you're not planning on using it and just move on. Render resolution. This, and people play with this to try again and squeeze some FPS out of their game. It's just a number at the top left of your screen. I mean, unless you're low 50s, 60s, and you're really trying to. But even at that, I wouldn't play with that. It messes with like the geometry. It messes with like the clarity of your game, and I don't think it's beneficial for anybody for 10 more FPS that you're not even gonna feel the difference having. So I would just leave it at 100% resolution, whatever your resolution is, whether it's 1080p, 1440p, 4K, whatever you guys play at. Just leave it at 100 and just we'll tweak some settings here to squeeze a bit more FPS. Upscale sharpening. Here you have two interesting settings. You have DLSS for NVIDIA users, which is long story short, DLSS is an AI upscaling technology. So let's say your native resolution is at 1440p. So DLSS is basically going to downscale the resolution to native 1080p and going to upscale it via AI technology to push the extra pixels, so double the pixels that you're supposed to get at 1440p, but it's going to render them through AI and not through the game and
Right.
what's actually supposed to be there. 1080p, it'll lower it down to 720p and then upscale it. If you're already getting like 100 in Warzone, like 150, 160 frames, this is not worth the extra 20 frames for your game again to look bad. That's up to you. It's you guys playing, but well, I don't find it worth it. Also for AMD users, FSR, which is also usable for any type of GPU, which whether it's Intel, Nvidia, AMD, you could use FSR. It's multi-platform. Same thing as the LSS. It's an AI upscaler, just has a different upscaling technique. But at the end, it's just basically the same concept. If you use the LSS and if you use FSR to boost your FPS, you don't want to use quality. You don't want to use ultra quality. This is used when, for example, you're trying to play the game at like 4K ray tracing maxed out, and like instead of playing it at like 60 FPS, you
Mhm.
want to play it at like 90 FPS. That's where like you're gonna go and reach these settings. Balanced performance is where like you want to go to use DLSS or FSR and like really like squeeze out some more frames out of it. Anti-aliasing.
Yeah, it seems like they have different options on this game than Warzone One had.
This what sucks is that if you don't have it on Filmic, okay, you see this black shadowy thing.
Yeah,
This only disappears when
you put it on
and it's
Filmic.
more prevalent when you're like on a skinned operator, like somebody, an operator that actually like can see like all these black shadows and it shows in like geometry and all that. And it sucks because this is the only way to actually get rid of it is to put it on Filmic, unfortunately. It's really there's no other option in the game that removes it, unfortunately. It does hit a bit of performance. If you're on a 10 series or 20 series, just keep it off. You don't care. But if you're on 30 series or 40 series, guys, don't be cheap with your hardware. You're buying all this hardware and you're spending all this money to like not play on low setting,
Yeah, because
So
some of those, turning up some of these settings where you're like maybe you're lowering your FPS, but then you can see people from farther away, like you're looking at like
Exactly.
actual images that you would be able to differentiate a person from a car or like a sign or
Absolutely.
something from farther away. Like,
Absolutely. Or see
yeah,
a
there's a lot
shadow.
of really good benefits to having some of these settings higher because you bought that higher hardware. Like that's the whole point of buying this higher hardware. You could run everything at
Exactly.
1080p, super low settings, and have a million FPS, but like you're not going to
Yeah.
see what you could see.
What I'm gonna show you the next few settings, there's two kind of tiers. The ones I'm gonna show you now, the ones that I would recommend if you're like, like using a newer PC, let's say 3070-ish and up
Mhm.
at 1440p, I would recommend the following settings. Very, very easy. Normal anti-aliasing quality, video memory scale maxed out, texture resolution normal, and anisotropic, normal, near level of detail, high. Distant level of detail, I would put it high. Clutter distance, long. Your tessellation, I would put it at all. What's tessellation? A lot of people have a misconception about that. Is the level of quality of your geometry. Okay, so when you see like anybody's stream or even your game just like looking flat, dull, no, like that is your tessellation. So
Mhm.
I recommend having it at all. Your game is going to look much, much better, especially if you're sniping or trying to see something at the distance. This will change your life. You have no idea. And obviously, this always off, no matter what. Texture streaming, always off. Give us HD map packs back. Let us decide if we want to spend 200 gigs on HD textures. Not this bullshit. Please, Infinity Word, Raven, we love you. Just give us map texture packs. HD, 200 gigs, 500 gigs. Let us decide,
I know
please.
plenty of people that would download that because this is
Oh,
the only game
dude.
they play. That's for like higher end hardware.
Yeah,
Now, if you're
higher end
looking at
hardware.
like
Yeah,
3060,
exactly.
20 series, 10 series, maybe
Exactly.
16 series,
Yeah, yeah.
here's what
Now
you
we're
should be
gonna
running
go over
instead.
that. This obviously, and just basically your video memory scale. I'll explain something really, really quick for this. If you're just gaming off a single PC or you're streaming but off dual PC, always keep this maxed out. If you are, for example, single PC streaming, I would always put it around 60 or 70, and leave the rest for your encoder for OBS or whatever program you may use to stream.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a pretty
that's what
key
I would say.
distinction. I think a lot of people just don't know about like
Yeah,
why they would need to adjust this. And
absolutely.
also like especially newer streamers, it's a really key thing to look out for is make sure you have that adjusted to your setup.
Texture resolution, 10 series cards, everything that's not a 2060 and up, I would put this on very low, if not 2060, even 2070 super, all that. Starting that, I would just leave it on low. Low here, distance, low, obviously, short, low here, particle quality very low. This is so particle quality low, particle quality level. Like I mean, it's the same option. I don't get it. Bullet space and impacts off, persistent damage layers off, shader quality low, tessellation. You can put it off. I would leave it near just to give that little extra like flavor. But I mean, again, 10 series, leave it off. 20 series, 27 and up, leave it at near. Terrain memory always to minimum, this always off. A lot of people have another misconception about this, the streaming quality. Putting this on low, you're telling the game that you don't want it to, regardless of the performance of your PC, regardless of the amount of VRAM that your card has, to not use more than 4 gigabytes of VRAM memory. So whether you have a 6900 XT with 24 gigs of VRAM, or you have 1060 Super with 4 gigs of VRAM, you're telling the game that regardless of the situation, regardless of what, you want to limit it at 4 gigs. If you have, 6 gigs and down of VRAM, put it on low. If you have 8 gigs or up, leave it on normal. All this, volumetric quality, physics, water caustics, shadow map resolution, shadows, shadow quality, these are all, I call them like cinematic settings. Competitive or Warzone or whatever, you want to leave these at off or very low. The spot caches your like not only your shadows but your textures, the upcoming like scenes and all that, like coming up, like the upcoming terrain and all that. It caches it into memory, so it has access to it faster. Always leave it as at higher ultra, and let the game manage that for you.
Leaving it on low is like back in the old Verdansk days when you would aim down scope on your sniper and then the whole building looks like putty for a second and a half. Like that
Literally,
that spot
exactly.
cache, putting it on ultra, that's going to help reduce the amount of
Yeah.
time that all those textures and everything's going to load. So
Exactly. Ultra
put it
or
on
high.
high.
Just at least leave it on high.
Yep.
Exactly. Particle lighting, ambient occlusion, screen space reflection. All these are, again, what I call cinematic settings. Just turn them off if you're playing, multiplayer or Warzone. There's absolutely no need for them. NVIDIA reflex low latency. That doesn't apply to AMD. This menu doesn't exist if you're on AMD. I always suggest on.
And
Okay.
then the last thing on
Now,
there, yeah, we didn't look at film grain. If you want to talk
so
to that real quick, on the very bottom.
where yeah, very bottom. Okay, so film grain, basically, it's like it just gives like this grainy effect. I usually leave it at 0.
Like a good way to sum it up is, yeah, we're giving you a baseline. We're kind of helping you understand what all these different settings do, so that way when you want to change something, you can look at a setting like, oh, I know that this, like, I know what anti-aliasing does. I know what the texture resolution does. I know what
Exactly.
like world motion blur does. It makes you a psycho. So we just, not only do we want to like kind of show you some of like best practices for settings that we consider are some of the best, but also we want you guys to know here's what that setting does so you can make an informed
Exactly.
decision.
Make do with what you have. Not everybody starts with the best hardware, the best this, the best that. Like you have to appreciate what you have. You have to know the limits of your hardware. Get to know your PC. But you know what? At the end of the day, guys, just enjoy the game. We're gonna be here. We're gonna start these new series, giving you the tips, tricks. We're gonna do more Windows in-depth stuff, optimizations. We wanted to give you this just to start because this is our most requested, I think, right?
Yeah,
Redneck?
I've had four or
Yeah,
five different people ask me for a video on this
you know,
in probably the last couple weeks.
exactly.
So those are our recommendations on Warzone 2 settings. So keep your eyes out
That's it.
for new videos because we're gonna keep these coming.